Hey everybody, what's going on? Helmite here, bringing another video from Grab the Lantern today. Riot put out an article recently where they talk about how both Zeri and Yuumi are two champions that are very frustrating to deal with and very difficult to balance in pro play, and while I've done a previous how to counter video for Zeri, I realized that I have not actually done one for the other champion on this list, Yuumi. Now, it may be getting ahead of myself a little bit to be doing one of these videos before Yuumi gets any changes, but I feel like now is probably a good time to talk about her as she exists, as she's definitely a difficult to deal with champion, a very frustrating to deal with champion, so I figured today I'd go ahead and talk through how to counter the cat. Now, Yuumi is, like I said, a very frustrating character. She can spend a lot of her time untargetably healing up her allies, poking with a near unavoidable skill shot, while also having an extremely powerful team fight thanks to the strength of Final Chapter. However, there are a bunch of things that you can exploit on Yuumi in order to make sure that you have the best time of dealing with her in lane especially, but also later in the game. I'll go through the individual abilities and how to counter them. I'll talk more generally about how to counter Yuumi, and then move on to some more specific counter picks. Yuumi's passive is realistically the biggest point of counterplay that Yuumi has. Yuumi's mana costs, which we'll touch on in a little bit here, are very, very expensive, and her passive does give her some degree of mana regeneration that she fundamentally needs in order to function. If she is not proccing her passive, she's never going to have enough mana to continually cast spells throughout the lane, which means that eventually she will just stop being able to cast spells, and then she'll be completely useless. As a result of this, Yuumi does have to hop off at some point, and this is where you can punish her. The second Yuumi hops off, you can use instant or near instant crowd control abilities to punish her from that. You can also throw damage her way, and even though she can just hop back on an ally to stay safe, you will be able to work down her health bar. Yuumi has very low health regeneration and very low base health in general, which means that it's very likely that she's just going to take too much damage and won't be able to hop off as readily as she can earlier. Prowling Projectile is a very difficult skill shot to dodge, primarily because Yuumi, the player, actually gets to control the projectile and guide it towards the target. And while this is a very frustrating skill shot to deal with, then, the most important thing to realize about Prowling Projectile is that there is a minimum turning radius. Prowling Projectile does not turn on a dime. It has a minimum turning radius, and that means that it can only turn so sharp. If you stand directly behind a line of minions, for example, Yuumi is very hard-pressed to actually line that up. If she does try to go wide around the wave, stepping into the Prowling Projectile will actually get you inside of its turning arc, and then she really can't actually hit you with it. If you're also standing within minions, the projectile gets larger if it's traveled at least half of its distance, which means that it's going to hit a unit and then disappear, and then the Prowling Projectile has gone away entirely and you've been able to deal with her. Stepping into the projectile in general is a good way to deal with it, unless it's heading straight at you, because it's a way to, again, abuse that turning radius, and just moving in general in unconventional ways will force the Yuumi player to calibrate in unfortunate ways, and they will potentially just not be able to hit you because they're not expecting the way that you're moving. But generally, moving into it is a good way to help guarantee that. There's not a lot of counterplay available to you and me, unfortunately. That is the ability that makes Yuumi untargetable, unfortunately. But there are a couple of things that we can point out, namely the fact that there is a very brief cast time on startup. Yuumi doesn't immediately start dashing. There's about a quarter second where Yuumi is in the process of starting you and me, and then it is a relatively slow-moving dash. Yuumi is exposed the entire time she is dashing. She doesn't actually go untargetable until she hits an ally. What this means is that if you have an ability to stop dash, if you can read the situation and say, hey, Yuumi, I'm going to stop you from actually being able to dash, something like a Poppy W or a Talia E, Yuumi is sort of put in a no-win situation. She doesn't have the opportunity to dash, and if you were able to start up that ability as Yuumi was in her cast animation, you can immediately interrupt it, and once you've interrupted it, it goes on an extended cooldown, which means that Yuumi is now no longer in a place where she can get to safety. There is essentially no counterplay possible for Yuumi's either. This is Yuumi's E, and it is the heal, the movement speed bonus, the attack speed bonus, the extra AP is a very frustrating ability to deal with, all things considered. Obviously, Grievous Wounds are a thing to consider when dealing with Yuumi, but the biggest thing is the cooldown is fairly lengthy, which means that Yuumi players will probably wait until the Grievous Wound duration wears off and then press the heal button, and it kind of undoes the necessity of Grievous Wounds in lane against Yuumi. I would actually probably advise against it. Instead, there's basically nothing you can do about it, but remember that there is a steroid attached to this. If Yuumi is pushing this button to accelerate her ally into attack range, they are also going to have an attack speed steroid. Keep this in mind when you do go for a trade. This also, however, means that if Yuumi is just sitting there spamming heal on her AD carry, she's actually not getting a lot of value out of the ability because the movement speed and attack speed bonuses are not being used. It's similar to Nami W. If all she's doing is pressing W on her partner in lane, that's actually a very inefficient use of her mana. Ebb and flow is sort of balanced around the fact that it's going to bounce multiple times. Yumi's E is balanced around the fact that you're giving your ally a bunch of steroids, so if she's just using it to top her AD carry off, she's being inefficient. Final chapter, finally, is a very difficult ability to deal with. It has a very wide range, both in width and length, and that can make it very difficult to actually get out of the area of effect. However, if you are able to get out of the area of effect, Yuumi has to hit you 3 times with the ultimate before it actually roots. What this means is that if you're able to dash or flash your way sideways, it can be difficult, if not impossible, for Yuumi to actually then lock you down and complete the rest of the damage of the ability. The ability also locks itself in the direction that Yuumi chooses when she starts casting, similar to Lucian Ultimate. Again, this means that lateral motion is a very good way to help dodge it, because especially if you juke back into the direction that Yuumi or her partner are moving, it can be difficult for Yuumi to then sort of calibrate and start moving back in the other direction. This is sort of an interesting conundrum for Yuumi, because if she hops off to try and keep the ultimate on you, Yuumi players tend to not build boots, which means that she doesn't actually have the movement speed to keep you in the AoE, but her ally may be slow to respond to Yumi's calls and say, you know, hey, stay on them, I want to try and root them with the ultimate. The ally may not actually set that up for them in a good way, which means that if you're playing especially in low coordination environments like solo queue, this is something that you can abuse. And all of these general counterplay tips sort of hint at the main weakness that Yuumi has, which is that she's not much of a champion on her own. Yuumi is about a half a champion if she is off of her friend. Like, literally any other champion in the game, except maybe a pre-level 6 Kayle, are going to beat Yuumi in a 1v1. If you see Yuumi and she's ever not with a friend, she is dead. There is nothing she can do about it. She can't fight, she can't run away. Yuumi players tend to not build boots, which means that if they do pop off their friend, they probably aren't running away, and they also don't take flash, because you kind of don't need it, which means that you're able to abuse that lack of mobility and otherwise punish the Yuumi. This means that the key to dealing with Yuumi is catching her when she is off of her friends, because that is when she is at her weakest. The biggest thing you can do in this regard is, again, play champions with near instant crowd control, because if you are able to CC Yuumi, her W goes on cooldown and she can't cast it again for an extended period of time, and this means that she's essentially dead in the water. She has no real way of escaping from the fight, she can't W to an ally, and she has some of the lowest defensive stats of any champion in the game, meaning that she is likely to go down in short order. There is an easy way to force this out as well, and that's because of Yumi's prodigious mana costs. Yumi's E costs her a percentage of her maximum mana every time she casts it, which means that it is not a cooldown that she's really able to spam, at least not without using her passive to help top her mana off. This is your ability to punish. If you hold on to your crowd controlling abilities, for example, let's say you're playing Thresh and you never use Flay, you never use Death Sentence, Yuumi is sort of stuck in a difficult situation. She wants to keep healing her friend by using Zoomies, but that's going to cost her a percentage of her mana every time she does it. If she hops off to try and restore some mana, you have the ability of punishing that with your instant crowd control ability in Flay, which means that then Yuumi is just dead weight. So she either stays on the ally with no mana and hopes that her innate mana regeneration is enough to get her through, or she hops off and potentially risks death at the hands of an all-in support. This is the best way of countering Yuumi, in my opinion, is just sitting on your crowd control abilities and say, do it, I dare you to hop off and try to restore your mana, because the second you try this, we're just going to CC you, and then we're going to kill you immediately afterwards. Honestly, that's the best thing that you can do in general to deal with Yuumi. The other thing that can potentially have some success is focusing down her AD carry. Yuumi tends to synergize very well with backline AD carries, not necessarily fighters, even though that's sort of the solo queue rage. And the things that Riot have said that they want to change about Yuumi are specifically her ability to play on a frontline fighter as opposed to a backline carry. So that's likely to change, which means that the counterplay I'm about to talk about is likely to stay the same regardless of whatever changes that Riot actually give her. Some of the best things that you can do then is play backline dive or backline burst. Champions like Vi, Wukong, or Xinjiao, who are easily able to access the backline, are really good choices because you can get to the enemy AD carry, you can burst them down, and once they're down, Yuumi is going to die afterwards, which is another one of the biggest disadvantages that Yuumi has, is that she's almost always a 2-for-1. if Yuumi's partner dies, Yuumi is probably dying as well, which is a disadvantage for that champion pick. It's one of the reasons why she's not that great. She can't even really hop off and run to safety, as you can sort of do with like a Soraka support. You can tell her, hey Soraka, run, I'm just dead. You can't do that with Yuumi, because where is she going to run? How is she going to run? She doesn't have boots, she doesn't have flash, she's probably still dead, so she's going down with the ship. One of the other things you can do, again, is single target burst. This means champions like Vex or Syndra, if you press all of your buttons and kill the enemy AD carry immediately, Yuumi's popping off, and at that point, Yuumi either has to find another host to jump to, or she's going to die in very short succession thereafter, but either way, you've deprived the enemy team of their turbocharged AD carry. Moving on to some individual counter picks. I know I talked a little bit about some of them, but Xinjiao, Vi, Syndra, Vex, all good champions for either getting to the backline and bursting the character, or just bursting Yuumi's host, and thereby preventing her from having any degree of flexibility in the game. The other champions you can play are champions that can sort of deny Yuumi's ability to hang out untargetably on a champion, or otherwise punish that. I hate to say it again, I really hate to say it again, but Poppy is an exceptionally good counter for Yuumi for a couple of reasons. One of which is Steadfast Presence. Steadfast Presence blocks dashes. If you are able to dash onto the enemy AD carry, Yuumi can't hop off without proccing it, and then she's going to get grounded, and then she can't dash back on. And it also means that if you dash on top of her AD carry, Yuumi then can't also dash to safety to a nearby team member, because if she tries to do that, she'll get blocked by Steadfast Presence, and then she'll be grounded, and then she'll be dead in short order. The other thing you can do is essentially take Yuumi's untargetability and turn it into a 2-for-1 by using Poppy's ultimate. If you eject the Poppy's AD carry, you're also, or the Yuumi's AD carry, you're going to eject the Yuumi as well. Therefore, you hit one champion, but two of them are out of the fight for an extended period of time, which lets you then pick the 3v5 that will follow, which is just a very powerful play for you to be able to make in general. As far as individual support picks or AD carry picks can go, champions with instant or near instant crowd control abilities are really good for countering Yuumi. Champions like Thresh, Alistar, Leona, these are all really good picks, because you can, if Yuumi hops off, you can sort of instantly flash and use one of your CC abilities, and that's instantly going to remove her ability to dash thereafter, and you can kill her from there. It's a very potent way of dealing with the Yuumi, where she also can't sort of hop off to do that mana regeneration play like I talked about. She's just going to die in short order. Soraka is also an interesting pick. I think Soraka helps counter the poke Yuumi builds where you max Q and try to do as much poke damage as possible. Soraka has really good sustain, which is going to prevent her from being able to do that, but you also have access to an instantaneous silence. If the Yuumi hops off to try and make a play, you can always plant Equinox under her feet. That is going to silence the Yuumi, and then she can't dash back onto her friend. She has the possibility of getting rooted, because again, she doesn't build movement speed. That's a bit of a difficult ability for her to run out of, and it means that if that does happen, she's been crowd controlled and she can no longer dash, which means that you can then punish her from there. But these are my general tips for helping to deal with Yuumi. You guys should let me know what you're doing to counter her down in the comment section below. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. If you enjoyed the video today, go ahead and leave it a like. And if you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I'll talk to you all later.